I'm Danielle Smith. I'm guest hosting for Common Sense Calgary, and we're doing interviews with the candidates for Calgary City Council in the upcoming municipal election. Joining me now is your Ward 7 candidate, Daria Bogdanov. Daria, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Danielle. Thanks for having me.
Let's begin by talking about why it is you decided to run for office. I understand that longtime council member Drew Farrell is not running again, but you'd made your decision to put your hat in before she announced that that was the case. Why did you decide that now was the time?
Well, I've been seeing our city disintegrate bit by bit, and I've really wanted to be involved and make a change. I think we need a real business-minded perspective, and I think that I can bring that to the table.
Okay, so let's then look back at the last term in office, in particular for the outgoing councillor. How do you think? What do you think of her decision making? Generally on the mark, or would you have done some things differently?
My perspectives are generally quite a bit more business orientated. I want to see small businesses succeed. I want to see residents paying less taxes. I want to see the city be quite a bit more efficient. I want to see more business activity within the ward. So a lot of my decisions would have been based more with those perceptions in mind.
Okay, let's then talk about your ward in particular. As you've been talking to constituents, what are the main three issues that they're raising for Ward 7?
Development is one that I'm hearing a lot of. Businesses want to develop, businesses want to grow, and the residents of Ward 7 want to see those businesses succeed. I feel that there's been a lot of obstacles for businesses to do so, so that's something that I would put a big push towards. Another thing that I'm really hearing a lot of is property tax, and I'm sure you've heard that throughout the wards and throughout the city. People are struggling to pay property taxes. They're increasing exponentially. Property taxes have actually increased by 100% over the last 10 years, which is a huge number. And people just simply can't, they can't afford to pay those kind of prices. Not only is that on the residential side, but also on the business end. There's businesses that just simply can't survive when they've got expenses such as those coming out.
Let's talk a bit about that, because you have a mixed ward where you've got a lot of business communities. So not only the big generator in the past downtown Calgary, but also a number of sort of small business districts, I think of Kensington, but then you've also got residential. And so in the past, it seems like the balance has been to keep residential rates low and the business rates were high, but with the hollowing out of the downtown business base, it's put so much pressure on some of those outlying communities and outlying businesses. So how would you balance that in your ward? You've got a pretty difficult balancing act.
Right. Well, what we're seeing in the downtown core is very, very large vacancy rates. A lot of corporations are taking their offices and moving them down south into the US or moving them into different cities just because they can't afford the property taxes associated. Which, firstly, we want those businesses in Calgary. Those businesses are profiting citizens of Calgary and residents of Ward 7, and us having those businesses present in the city is extremely beneficial. I feel like we're losing out a lot by having all these businesses, seeking better environments for themselves.
So what about this issue of tax shift that's come up? Is that we're seeing more of the residential base take on some of that additional tax burden from the business side? Are you supportive generally of that approach?
In regards to the residents taking the burden of some of the property taxes of corporations, is that what you're getting at? No, I'm not. I think that what we need to do is reduce property tax by reducing spending. I don't think that residents need to burden the expense of that would have otherwise been taken care of businesses. I believe that all in all, we need to reduce property tax by reducing our spendings.
Okay, let's talk about how you might go about doing that. So do you think the city is spending too much? Are they spending too little in some areas? Is it about right? I'm wondering if your idea of trying to get things into balance is attracting more businesses and more individuals so that you increase the amount of revenues, or if you do need to see absolute spending cuts. How do you see it?
I think that spending can be done more efficiently. I don't think we need to necessarily reduce spending in any specific area. I just believe that it can be done in a lot more efficient manner by budgeting correctly and by having the right people in place that can allocate monies to specific resources.
Okay, so what makes you believe that you're the right person to be at the table? What kind of business experience and background do you bring to the role?
So I've been in the business. I've been in the business community for about 15 years. I had previously owned a consulting firm, and the function of that consulting firm was to help companies budget, to help companies become more efficient, to build structure where there's more fluency within a corporation. So I have a lot of experience in those avenues, and I think that I can bring those skills and those experiences to managing Ward 7 and the budget.
Give me an idea of how you would approach it. It's a huge budget, both operating and capital. We'll talk more specifically about capital in a minute. One of the big challenges of any public sector enterprise is a lot of money is spent in wages and benefits and pensions. Do you have some thoughts on how you might approach that issue?
I think pensions should be reduced. I think that there's a lot of money that goes out unnecessarily, and nobody really benefits from some of those expenditures because of inefficiencies within the system.
Do you have a process for how you would find some of those efficiencies? It's always a big challenge because oftentimes a group will present and say, all right, we need to do a 5% across the board. And then administration will come back and say, we couldn't possibly do that. So they come back and with granular ideas, and then it's, oh my goodness, now you're picking on one particular department versus another. Is there another way that you can approach spending cuts?
Right. And that's a very touchy subject because nobody, myself included, wants to take money away from any specific area. And as I said, I believe that it's more about efficiency in budgeting rather than reduction in allocating money to specific areas.
Okay, tell us a little bit about where you see the core function of a city being. There've been as the city grows, obviously there's more demand to provide more services. But what do you see the core job of the city of Calgary being?
The core job of the city of Calgary is to provide the best possible environment for its citizens and its businesses to grow and prosper.
All right. Well, let's then talk about the role of the administration and the council, because I think I've observed that the administration does drive a lot of initiatives, and city council has varying degrees of input on that. Do you think that balance is about right, or do you think that the council needs to be more involved?
I think the council needs to listen more to the citizens and what the citizens need and the citizens' opinions. I found that with time, city council members tend to listen less and less as time goes on. Everybody seems to be quite involved at the beginning, but as terms go on and as people have stayed in office for years, there's become less involvement within the community, and that's something that I would plan to change.
Okay, you get elected as an independent, but to get anything done on council, you need to convince at least 7 others to vote with you. Give us some examples of how you might approach that based on similar situations you may have been in the past.
I think there's quite a few individuals that feel similarly as I do in reducing property taxes, promoting business, promoting initiative within the community. So I think my thoughts are not singular. I think there's quite a few people that feel that it's time for that change.
Okay, one of the things that I recall is Jeremy Farkas tried to make a number of measures to bring council spending on their own benefits and transition allowances and pensions down and didn't get much success. How do you feel about council being the first to take some of those measures?
Well, I think there needs to be some changes within the council. In terms of terms, I believe that terms should be regulated. I don't think that a council member should be able to be in office more than 2 terms, because as I mentioned previously, there needs to be change and there needs to be involvement. And based on what I've seen, that involvement reduces once terms go on and on.
Do you think there should be a pay cut for council members?
I think that there should be one pension. There's currently a couple of pensions that council members take, and I think that should be reduced to 1.
Okay, let's talk about the capital side. We've talked a bit about operating expenses. Oh, before I leave this one, new taxation powers, they often come up every couple of years in the context of city charter discussion or with new reports. I think there was a report last year that came out that recommended a whole variety of ways that the city of Calgary could seek new revenue streams. Do you support new taxation powers?
I support new revenue streams.
Like what?
As far as new taxation powers, it would really have to depend on the taxation power in itself and who it benefits and who it taxes.
So give me an example of a tax that you might support or a new revenue stream that you might support.
I think that we should be looking at various different streams of revenue to the city. There's a lot of new developments in the environment, in technology, in all sorts of different fields. And I think that for our city to be ahead and not lag behind, we definitely need to explore those different areas and get our citizens involved in jobs and any new developments that exist.
All right. On that front, one of the things that we've seen before is that the city has thought that setting aside $100 million for business attraction was one of the strategies that they employed through the Calgary Economic Development Authority. Do you support that, providing direct business support to individual businesses?
That again comes back to budgeting and efficiency. I don't think that throwing lump sums of money at any organization is necessarily good without a plan. I think every dollar spent needs to have a purpose for such, and that again comes back to efficiency and in allocating resources.
All right. You talked as well about bringing in new revenue streams, attracting new businesses. Let me ask you the question about this is one of the big things that you have to deal with as a council member is your development strategy. So there seems to be this tension between, do you densify and build up, or do you do new greenfield development? Both of them, I think, have issues in mind of affordable housing, because it's sort of young families that tend to want to have a new home in the suburb. But you can also have more multifamily housing if you're taking the approach of densifying and building up. How do you balance those issues?
Well, I think there's a space for both. I think both, and if we're talking specifically in Ward 7 is very central. I definitely think that there's opportunity to benefit from let's call it upward development as well. There's some areas that need to be left to that suburban environment. Okay,
let's talk about the guidebook for communities, because that created a lot of pushback at council when it was first put forward. I don't know. Was it controversial in your area? Your area seems to be a little bit more mixed use, especially because it's established communities and you've got this mix of business and multifamily. Did you hear from your residents? Are they upset with the approach being proposed?
Yeah, and that's something that I'm exploring right now. I've been out talking to residents of Ward 7 and engaging their perspectives and thoughts. And again, of course, with the intent of bringing that back and presenting those to moving forward.
Okay, let's talk then about some of the capital projects. So the capital side of the budget is another huge expense, and there've been a few big ticket items that have been proposed. Wanted to get your thought on it. First, let's talk about the Green Line, which began as a $4.5 billion project, supposed to be 40 kilometers, stretching to the deep north and the deep south. And now it is going to be a more expensive project, and it's going to be half the number of kilometers built, and it goes to neither the deep north or the deep south. Obviously, the transportation minister has expressed concern that it doesn't connect in with the existing system. Tell me what you would do with that project.
So that again comes back to inefficiencies, right? And when we're seeing more money being spent on something that's doing less for the community, we've got to ask the question, why? And why is that taking place? And what are the inefficiencies of of projects going over budget and underperforming?
So what would you do with that one? Would you proceed with it, or would you want to see it canceled?
I think that requires a bit more research as to find out why it's why it's not working as best as it should. And once that research is done, obviously to reduce whatever obstacles that are standing in the way of making it the most efficient project that it can be.
Okay, so a couple other big ticket capital items were proposed: the event center with the Calgary Flames, the BMO Center expansion for new convention space, the Arts Common transformation, and the Foothills Fieldhouse. When the city voted to approve these projects, they did so against the advice of the city's own CFO, because they said that there wasn't enough money to do all of them. So do you think the city made the right decision
to
go ahead with all four?
Again, similar with the Green Line project, I think that discovering where the money is being allocated to can serve a lot of benefit, because I believe that a lot of money goes to waste in administrative costs, or in different other areas where it's just not actually providing the benefit to the project that it should.
Okay, if you had been on council and you could only choose one, which of those four projects would you have chosen to go ahead with? What would have been your priority?
I do believe that that the stadium is an effective project for the city. I think that the stadium brings a lot of money into the city from performing it. So that's one that I would go ahead with.
Okay, let's then talk a little bit more about downtown vacancy, because that is going to be, since it's right in the middle of your ward. Do you have some thoughts on what could be done to solve that problem? I've heard it quantified that there's as many as 100 to 140,000 employees that could be accommodated with all that vacant space. What do you think needs to be done?
Right. Well, and currently rental rates are quite low. So that's not the issue. The issue is coming back again to property tax, which is, there's large companies such as Devon or other large corporations that have just moved out of the city because they can't afford to pay that amount of property tax.
And so what would you do?
Coming back to, again, reducing property tax, and with that reduction in property tax, as I mentioned, to rather than taking money away from certain areas, working on efficiency within the budget.
Okay, let's go through. There's a few sort of rapid items that I wanted to get to. The snow removal was a big issue this past winter season. Maybe more so in the new communities where we've got a lot of cul-de-sacs and the streets aren't as wide. Are you hearing from residents? Was snow removal a problem?
Yes, yeah, I have heard snow removal being a problem, and it depends on the property and the residents. I think there's different sorts of solutions to snow removal.
Do you have some thoughts on what that might look like? What would you change?
Well, there's certain communities that they're paying a sum of money to have snow removed, and that sum of money can be quite large. So I would, I don't think that, I think we should reduce any expenditures that are forced on residents of the community. I think we should reduce them and lower them to as much as we possibly can.
All right. A couple of ideas have come forward to allow for contracting out or private sector delivery in the case of a portion of garbage collection, maybe snow removal, delivery of golf courses or operating golf courses. Are you generally in support of that? And are there any areas that you think they should look at more private sector involvement?
Again, I'm not a large fan of mandatory fees. I think a lot of the time when the mandatory fees are implemented, a portion of those fees goes to sources that are not, in fact, benefiting the residents, and those costs can go into administration or other areas that just aren't specifically necessary.
So from a perspective of private sector delivery, you'd oppose it because it would lead to user fees? I'm just trying to see the connection there.
Yeah, private sector delivery depends on the community and depends on the situation. I think a lot of those can be minimized, or perhaps they can be those decisions can be made by the residents of the ward themselves.
Okay, let's talk about a few big ticket items. The frontline services for police, fire, and EMS. There is a movement to, they call it Defund Police, which is to take a portion of the police budget and allocate it towards other social services for addiction and for mental health response. Do you support that movement?
I think the term defund the police has been overused, and it's a very controversial term, especially with some of the events that took place in the US. As a whole, I think the police force in Calgary has done a very good job and a very efficient job. I do believe that there should be money allocated to specific social services like addiction or mental health. As far as defunding the police, I'm just not a big fan of that term in itself.
Okay, let's talk about the approach to fire. Do you think everything is going fine there, or have you heard that there are any issues or efficiencies that can be had?
As far as fire goes, again, the team in Calgary does a wonderful job. I think we should all be quite proud of the way that of the work that they do. I don't believe that any money should be taken away from their.
Okay. The city got into a bit of a fight with the province over the issue of EMS centralizing dispatch. There's sort of two sides to it. On the one hand, a lot of firefighters are first responders to medical scenes, so that's one of the reasons the city argues to continue it centralized, but the province argues that it would save money to have a central dispatch. Where do you come down on that issue?
I believe that that response should be a little bit more specific. I don't believe that. I believe that there should be a little bit of vetting when it comes to who arrives at the scene, because it's not always necessary for 4 different parties to arrive to a scene, which might be relevant to one. So there should just be a little bit more of course, that's not always possible in all cases, but when possible, there should be a little bit more specific forces arriving to specific scenes that are most suited to them.
Okay, just a couple more here. The issue of public art, it's caused a bit of a black eye to the city. I think we all remember the kerfuffle around the Great Blue Ring and a few other projects. Do you think that they've fixed the process for how to approve public art, or do you have any other ideas of how they could approach that?
That big blue ring, we all love that thing. So as far as public art goes, I do think public art is important. I do think that the appearance of our city is important. What I would like to implement is more public art that's being put forth from Calgarians. I'd love to get different communities, different minority communities, perhaps different schools involved in making that art, rather than putting our finances towards outside of the city.
Okay, let's talk about a couple of the referenda questions that are coming forward. Calgary's had referenda in the past, for instance, with the Olympic bid and fluoride historically. The city had the opportunity to put two questions to the public. One, the issue of fluoride again, as well as reducing speed limits to 40 kilometers per hour in residential decisions or residential areas. So they made the choice to allow Calgarians to vote on fluoride, but not on speed limits. Do you think that was the right choice?
I think Calgarians should be able to vote on both those topics. I'd like to put a lot more emphasis on the voice of Calgarians and what Calgarians want.
All right. Let me just go to this last one. Oftentimes, councilors have to decide and have to balance between the interests of their own constituents and the issue and the benefit to the city as a whole. So if you were confronted with a situation where your constituents wanted you to do one thing, but the city of Calgary was recommending something different for the benefit of the whole city, how would you balance that?
Again, I'd like to put a lot of emphasis on the needs and the opinions of Calgarians in Ward 7. Of course, it's a balancing act with, with other wards. We can, not all decisions can be made individually by a ward for that ward because we're all interconnected in the city. So it comes down to a bit of a balancing act in that regards.
All right. Well, thanks so much for your time today. I sure appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
You got it. This is Daria Bogdanov, who is your candidate for Ward 7.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.